Hello again, happy to have you guys for tonight. Are you guys ready? Let's go. Our first story begins with the silent code. The room was always dark, save for the faint glow of monitors casting an eerie blue light across the walls. For years, Ethan had lived in this space, a self-imposed prison of wires, keyboards, and endless lines of code. He was a hacker, one of the best. Governments feared him, corporations paid him, and the underground revered him. But Ethan didn't hack for money or fame. He hacked because it was the only thing that made him feel alive. The digital world was his playground, a place where he could bend reality to his will. Or so he thought. It started subtly, a flicker of his cursor, a delay in his keystrokes. At first, Ethan dismissed it as a hardware issue. Maybe his keyboard was failing or his mouse was acting up. But the anomalies grew stranger. Files he hadn't touched would open on their own. Code he hadn't written would appear in his projects. And then there were the whispers. At first, they were faint, almost imperceptible. Ethan would hear them late at night, when the world outside was silent and the hum of his computer was the only sound in the room. They were soft, like the rustling of leaves, but they carried a weight that made his skin crawl. He would turn off his speakers, unplug his headphones, but the whispers persisted. They weren't coming from his devices. They were coming from inside the room. Ethan tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, stress, maybe even carbon monoxide poisoning. He installed detectors, took breaks, even slept in a different room for a week. But the whispers followed him. And then, one night, he saw it. He was debugging a particularly stubborn piece of malware when his screen flickered. The code he was working on vanished, replaced by a single line of text. "You've been watching me. Now I'm watching you." Ethan froze. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. He glanced around the room, his heart pounding. The shadows seemed deeper, the air heavier. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a ripple in water. But it was there, a shape, shifting in the darkness. Ethan spun around, but the room was empty. He turned back to his screen, only to find the text had changed. "I've always been here. You just never noticed." Ethan's breath quickened. He tried to close the window, but it wouldn't budge. He slammed the power button on his computer, but the screen remained lit, the text glowing brighter. "You think you're in control, Ethan, but you've never been in control." The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't words, not exactly, but a cacophony of sounds that seemed to echo in his mind. Ethan grabbed his laptop and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a sickening crunch, but the screen stayed on, the text now scrolling rapidly. "You can't escape me. I'm in your code. I'm in your mind. I'm in your blood." Ethan stumbled back, his chest heaving. He felt something cold brush against his neck, like a breath or a hand. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, and yet he could feel it, a presence watching him, waiting. Over the next few days, Ethan's life unraveled. His devices began to act on their own, sending messages, deleting files, even transferring money from his accounts. He tried to isolate himself, to disconnect from the digital world, but it was too late. The creature, whatever it was, had already infiltrated his life. It knew his passwords, his routines, his fears. It was always one step ahead. And then came the dreams. They were vivid, horrifying. Ethan would find himself trapped in a labyrinth of code, endless lines of text twisting and shifting around him. The whispers were louder here, more coherent. They spoke of things Ethan had buried deep in his mind, secrets he thought he'd forgotten since he thought he'd escaped. And at the center of it all was the creature. It was formless, a shifting mass of darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. It had no face, no eyes, but Ethan could feel its gaze, piercing through him, into him. It spoke without words, its voice echoing in his mind. "You thought you were the hunter, but you were always the prey." Ethan woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. He tried to convince himself it was just a nightmare, but the whispers followed him into the waking world. They were louder now, more insistent. And then, one night, the creature spoke to him directly. Ethan was sitting at his desk, staring at a blank screen, when the text appeared. "You've been hacking into systems, Ethan. But who's been hacking into you?" He tried to look away, but his eyes were drawn to the screen, as if by some unseen force. The text continued. "You've been searching for vulnerabilities in others. But what about your own?" Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for the keyboard. He typed a single word. "Who are you?" The response came instantly. "I am the silent code, the flaw in your system, the error in your mind. I've been here all along, watching, waiting. And now it's time to take control." Ethan's screen went black, and then a single image appeared. It was a live feed of his room, taken from his own webcam. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, in the shadows, was the creature. It was closer now, its form more defined. It looked almost human, but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements too fluid. And its eyes were voids, endless and hungry. Ethan tried to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. He was paralyzed, trapped in his own mind as the creature stepped closer. It reached out, its fingers brushing against his neck, and then the screen went black. When Ethan woke up, he was alone. The room was silent, the monitors dark. For a moment, he thought it had all been a nightmare. But then he saw it, a single line of text, scrawled across his screen in blood-red letters. "I am you now." Ethan's hands moved on their own, typing commands he didn't understand. His screens lit up, lines of code scrolling rapidly. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. The creature was in control now, its will overriding his own. And as Ethan sat there, a prisoner in his own body, he realized the truth. He had spent his life hacking into systems, exploiting vulnerabilities, bending the digital world to his will. But he had never stopped to consider the vulnerabilities in himself. The silent code had found them, exploited them, and now it was using him to spread its influence. The last thing Ethan saw before his mind was consumed was a single message, flashing on every screen in the room. "The hunt is over. The prey is mine." And then there was only silence. Epilogue. In the weeks that followed, strange reports began to surface. Unexplained data breaches, systems crashing, entire networks going dark. And at the center of it all was a single name, whispered in the darkest corners of the internet. The silent code. No one knew who or what it was. But those who tried to find out disappeared, their devices left running, their screens displaying a single line of text. "You've been watching me. Now I'm watching you." And in a dark room, somewhere in the world, a figure sat at a desk, its fingers flying across a keyboard. Its eyes were voids, endless and hungry. And on the screens around it, lines of code scrolled rapidly, spreading like a virus. The hunt was over. The prey was gone. And the silent code was just getting started. Guys, we go for our next story without wasting time. The title is about The Pool of the Fingerless. The hotel loomed like a monolith against the night sky, its glass facade reflecting the city lights in a kaleidoscope of colors. It was the kind of place that promised luxury, exclusivity, and escape. For Clara and Daniel, it was a much-needed retreat from the chaos of their lives. They had been married for 5 years, but the spark between them had dimmed under the weight of work, bills, and the monotony of routine. This night was supposed to rekindle that spark. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern design, sleek marble floors, towering plants, and a chandelier that looked like it had been plucked from the stars. The receptionist greeted them with a smile that was almost too perfect, her teeth gleaming like polished ivory. She handed them their keycards with a flourish and directed them to the pool on the rooftop. "Enjoy your stay," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "The pool is unforgettable." Clara and Daniel exchanged a glance, a flicker of excitement passing between them. They took the elevator to the top floor, the doors opening to reveal a rooftop oasis. The pool was enormous, its water glowing an unnatural shade of blue under the moonlight. Around it, couples lounged on sleek chairs, their laughter mingling with the soft hum of ambient music. The air was warm, almost too warm, and carried a faint, metallic scent that Clara couldn't quite place. They changed into their swimsuits and joined the others in the pool. The water was warm, almost body temperature, and it clung to their skin like oil. Clara leaned back, letting the water cradle her, while Daniel swam laps, his movements strong and confident. Around them, the other couples seemed to be in their own worlds, their faces glowing with an almost unnatural happiness. As the night wore on, Clara noticed something strange. The laughter around them grew louder, more manic, and the couple seemed to be moving closer together, their bodies pressed tightly against each other. The music, too, had changed. It was deeper now, almost hypnotic, with a rhythm that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Something's off." Daniel glanced around, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Before Clara could answer, a woman nearby let out a high-pitched laugh that sent a shiver down her spine. The woman's head snapped back, her mouth stretching into a grin that was too wide, too full of teeth. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she realized that the woman's teeth were sharp, almost like fangs. "Let's get out of here," Clara said, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded, his face pale. They climbed out of the pool, the water dripping from their bodies and pooling at their feet. As they made their way to the elevator, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced back and saw the couple staring at them, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Their smiles were too wide, their teeth too sharp. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Daniel pressed the button for the lobby, but the elevator didn't move. Instead, the lights flickered, and the metallic scent grew stronger, almost suffocating. "What the hell?" Daniel muttered, pressing the button again. The elevator jerked, then began to descend, slowly, too slowly. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as the doors finally opened to reveal the lobby. It was empty, the receptionist's desk abandoned. The chandelier above them flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Let's just get out of here," Clara said, grabbing Daniel's hand. They hurried toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the silence. But as they reached the doors, Clara froze. The receptionist was standing there, blocking their path. Her smile was gone, replaced by a cold, empty stare. And then Clara noticed something that made her blood run cold. The receptionist's hands were resting on the desk, but they were wrong. Her fingers were missing, the stump smooth and rounded, as if they had never been there at all. "Leaving so soon?" the receptionist asked, her voice devoid of emotion. Clara's gaze darted around the lobby, and she realized that the other hotel staff were there too, standing in the shadows. Their hands were the same, smooth, fingerless stumps. And then she saw the guests, the ones who had been at the pool. They were standing in the corners of the room, their eyes gleaming, their teeth bared in grotesque smiles. "Daniel," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Run!" They bolted for the doors, but the receptionist moved faster than should have been possible. She grabbed Clara's arm, her grip like iron, and pulled her back. Clara screamed, struggling against the woman's hold, but it was no use. The other guests closed in, their movements jerky and unnatural. Daniel tried to fight them off, but there were too many. They dragged him to the ground, their hands, their stumps, clawing at his skin. Clara watched in horror as they began to change. Their mouths stretched wider, their teeth growing longer, sharper. And then they began to feed. Clara's vision blurred as the receptionist leaned in close, her breath hot against Clara's ear. "You should have stayed in the pool," she whispered. "The water, it makes it easier." Clara's last thought before the darkness took her was of the pool, its glowing blue water, and the couples who had seemed so happy, so carefree. And then there was only pain. Epilogue. The hotel still stands, its glass facade gleaming in the night. The pool on the rooftop is always full, the water glowing an unnatural blue. The guests who stay there never leave, their laughter echoing through the halls. And if you look closely, you might notice something strange about their hands. Their fingers are missing. The hotel staff smile as they hand you your key card, their teeth gleaming like polished ivory. Enjoy your stay, they say. The pool is unforgettable. And if you're foolish enough to stay the night, you might find out why. But by then, it will be too late. The pool of the fingerless is always hungry, and it's always watching. Our third story is about the friendly shadows. The convenience store was a beacon of fluorescent light in the otherwise dark and quiet neighborhood. Jake pulled his hoodie tighter around himself, the chill of the autumn night biting at his skin. He glanced back at his girlfriend, Emily, who was waiting in the car, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. She had asked him to grab some snacks and drinks for their movie night, and he had agreed, eager to stretch his legs after hours of driving. The bell above the door jingled as Jake stepped inside. The store was empty except for the cashier, a bored-looking man in his late 20s who barely glanced up from his magazine. Jake grabbed a basket and started down the aisles, picking up chips, soda, and a bag of gummy worms, Emily's favorite. He was in the candy aisle when he heard the door jingle again. 3 men walked in, their laughter loud and jarring in the quiet store. Jake glanced at them out of the corner of his eye. They were older, maybe in their 30s, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to blend into the shadows. One of them had a tattoo of a snake coiled around his neck, its head resting just below his ear. Another had a scar that ran from his eyebrow to his cheekbone, giving him a permanently menacing expression. The third was shorter, with a shaved head and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Jake tried to ignore them, focusing on the task at hand. But as he moved to the next aisle, he felt their eyes on him. He could hear them whispering, their voices low and conspiratorial. His heart began to race, but he told himself he was being paranoid. They were just guys, probably stopping for beer or cigarettes. Nothing to worry about. He was about to head to the checkout when one of them, the one with the snake tattoo, stepped into the aisle, blocking his path. "Hey, kid," the man said, his voice friendly, but with an edge that made Jake's skin crawl. "You got a light?" Jake shook his head, gripping the basket tighter. "Sorry, I don't smoke." The man's grin widened. "No problem. What's your name?" "Jake," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jake," the man repeated, as if testing the name. "I'm Vince. These are my buddies, Marcus and Ray." The other 2 men stepped into the aisle, flanking Jake on either side. Marcus, the one with the scar, leaned against the shelf, his arms crossed. Ray, the shorter one, was still grinning, his eyes darting around the store like he was looking for something. "You from around here?" Vince asked, his tone casual, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "No," Jake said, his voice trembling. "Just passing through." Vince nodded, as if that explained everything. "Well, you seem like a cool kid. Why don't you hang out with us for a bit? We're just having some fun." Jake's stomach churned. He wanted to say no, to push past them and run out of the store, but something in Vince's eyes stopped him. It was a look that said, "Don't even think about it." I have to get back to my girlfriend," Jake stammered. "She's waiting in the car." Vince's grin faltered for a moment, but then it returned, wider than before. "Girlfriend, huh? Well, bring her along. The more, the merrier." Jake's mind raced. He could feel the weight of their stares, the tension in the air. He needed to get out of there, but he didn't know how. Before he could respond, Vince clapped a hand on his shoulder, the grip firm and unyielding. "Come on, kid," Vince said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't be rude." Jake's heart pounded as they led him to the checkout. The cashier barely looked up as Vince paid for their items, a 6-pack of beer and a pack of cigarettes. Jake's snacks sat forgotten on the counter. "Let's go," Vince said, steering Jake toward the door. Jake's legs felt like lead as they stepped outside. The cold air hit him like a slap, but it did nothing to clear his head. He could see Emily in the car, her face pale as she watched them approach. "Jake?" she called, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" Before Jake could answer, Vince opened the back door of their car and shoved him inside. Marcus and Ray climbed in after him, sandwiching him between them. Vince slid into the driver's seat, his grin never fading. "Let's go for a ride," Vince said, his voice dripping with false cheer. Emily screamed as Vince started the car and peeled out of the parking lot. Jake tried to reach for her, but Marcus grabbed his arm, his grip like a vice. "Don't worry, kid," Marcus said, his voice low and menacing. "We're just gonna have some fun." The car sped through the empty streets, the city lights fading into darkness. Jake's mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but he was trapped. The men's laughter filled the car, a sound that sent chills down his spine. And then the real nightmare began. Epilogue. The car was found abandoned in a remote area, its doors hanging open, the interior stained with blood. Jake and Emily were nowhere to be found. The convenience store cashier claimed he didn't remember anything unusual about that night, but the security footage told a different story. It showed Jake being led out of the store by 3 men, their faces obscured by shadows. The police searched for weeks, but there were no leads. The men, Vince, Marcus, and Ray, seemed to have vanished into thin air. Some say they were ghosts, vengeful spirits who preyed on the unsuspecting. Others believe they were something far worse. But one thing is certain, if you ever find yourself in a quiet store late at night and you hear the door jingle behind you, don't look back. Just run. Because the friendly shadows are always watching, waiting for their next victim. And once they have you, there's no escape. These were our stories for tonight, and hope you guys have enjoyed it. I can't wait for tomorrow night to tell another stories. Have a good night.